Hello, Duel Academy duelists, and this is Corbin again with my Ancient Gear deck. I actually made some slight tweaks to it since my last deck profile, which that debuted on Hukuna My Data's channel, so shout out to him. But I guess without further ado, as promised, this is my comprehensive deck list, and I'm going to give you a couple combo tutorials at the end of this video. But without further ado, the cards I did cut out were these three. And I'll explain my reasoning behind them later on, but overall, let's just get into the deck list. So we have 5 starters in total. Actually, there are many starters, but these are our normal summon starters slash ways to extend into different things. You got the Ancient Gear Wyvern, which on summon, normal or special, gets you that one Ancient Gear card. You can't set for the rest of the turn, but again, this is all gas, so we're going to do the Ancient Gear frame at 2 now because realistically, upon testing and further experience, discarding a card really only needs to come up once. If anything, you don't want to see this card, but it is getting you access to advance, and advance is really important in the entire strategy of the deck. You have 3 Ancient Gear Tanker. Ancient Gear Tanker is another way of extending if this is in conjunction with your Gear Town, as well as bringing back your fallen comrades in the graveyard, ignoring their summoning conditions, and also from the hand. The only stipulation behind that, as you all know, is obviously your opponent needs to control a monster if you want it from the graveyard, and that 600 attack boost actually does help close out the game easier. We have 2 Ancient Gear Commander. We were running 2 traps in the previous list, but this list, I'm just going to stick with the 1 Ancient Gear Duel. All of this should be enough. You're not trying to prepare to go for turns 3 and 4, though even if it does come up, with Fortress out alone, it's enough of a problem for your opponent. You don't even need cards like Ancient Gear Reborn and ways to get stuff out. But the second one would ultimately come up if they got rid of it, and it's another way in the same vein as Ancient Gear Tinker to get 2 bodies on the field to get your Ancient Gear Ballista. We have 2 Dark Golem. I used to have it at 3, not in the previous list, but one list prior, and I felt like it was good enough of a card in conjunction with Tinker, but all of the ways you want to get to Dark Golem usually lead to your Ballista, and Ballista goes into Gear Town. Gear Town with Catapult, usually it's Catapult bringing this out, if not the Gear Town effect to special it from the deck, hand, or graveyard. So 2 it is a good way to avoid bricks, and there's for that. We have 1 Ancient Gear Reactor Dragon. Now, I have a love-hate relationship with this card, though it is kind of the only way to out certain back row pieces if your opponent has stuff like Nightmare Pain on the field. You'll have to take 3,000 damage, but at the end of the damage step, you can just nuke a card on your opponent's back row, or actually one of your own cards, so it destroys any spell or trap. The other stuff in between it's not terribly relevant because you need to tribute like a Gear Gadget or whatever. But it is an Armades when it does attack, so not only does it have the spell or trap protection, but it also has the monster protection, so they can't respond with monster effects. Now, you could definitely combine this with quick play spells and other stuff, which I have done, which makes this guy a really good utility piece in getting rid of key pieces to your opponent's strategy and putting the pressure on in that way. But that's kind of the thing, is it's not necessarily coming up 100% of the time, but it is relevant enough to where you actually need an in-deck way to get rid of spells and traps. The 1 box, obviously you hate to see it in your hand, but you love to see yourself search it. Again, Ballista helps you get to this, as well as any of your other Shirkers, and this will go into any of your other starters that you haven't already normal summoned, if not special summoned. One of which being Ancient Gear Dragon. Another one of, again, this is something that you can go into with Catapult and or Tinker, or you can just normal summon it, and it helps stop kind of that extra piece of back row your opponent has, if not like a graveyard effect of a certain trap or spell card in the grave, which it does actually put the pressure on turn 3 and 4, especially against matchups that have spells and traps as their starters. So I've actually found this most useful against the Tempai matchup. Usually it was just him and a Chaos Giant, and with that alone, they weren't able to use the quick play spell in the battle phase, and then they couldn't even use their monster effects in the battle phase because of Chaos Giant. So this is another kind of like love-hate card, but overall, I feel like it is really powerful for the deck to have any negate, any form of being able to stop your opponent or make it awkward enough for them to not fully get rid of your board, such as like preventing destruction of some of your floodgate pieces if you're going first, or just protecting some of your back row like Fortress from Cosmic and other stuff like that. The spell and trap negate is decently viable. And the one golem, you gotta use one, especially if you're using the dragon, and if you want to be able to go into some of the other plays that include this guy and the commander itself. We'll go into that later on, but that's just the one-ofs of all the Ancient Gear cards. Super Express Bullet Train, good extender. If you already have Earth Machine and only Earth Machine, you can summon it. At the end phase, you do get a monster back from the graveyard that is an Earth Machine. Works really well with Regulus, which I'll show you in just 2 seconds, but this is usually one of the targets I bring out with Urgent Schedule. It's that level 5 or higher machine, and you can also, in conjunction, summon out your level 4 or lower Earth Machine as well. So usually, what you would do if you're using Urgent Schedule is you would bring out the Tenguki and then either Tanker or Dark Golem itself, and those are really good ways to just kind of put 2 bodies on the board, go into your Ballista, or even like a Clifford Genius, and at that point, that will bait negate, or you can either bait the negate by using Clifford Genius to attempt to negate a card effect on the field. And let's say you already have a Gear Town or a face-up continuous spell you're not using, and you can just negate each one of those, and then at that point you can continue to play by banishing the Tenguki, summon out your Golem from the graveyard, the Dark Golem, and then you'll search 2 cards and be able to go from there. Here's the One King Regulus. I've always debated on just like having this thing sided out, but having it in actually is relevant enough going second, because oftentimes you will have those Earth Machines that end up in the graveyard. You can just bring this guy out to bait another negate, if not have this be a good piece to your end board going first. So then the last card, Magical Hound, you saw this one on stream. In this format, I feel like it's pretty relevant. Not only of getting rid of key back row pieces like Nightmare Pain and the Sequentia equip, or well, usually the Sequentia is equipped to the Desiree, if not another monster. That's a good way to kind of permanently remove that negate, because it can't negate it in a hand. Now it also gets rid of floodgates, and it works in the graveyard as well. So if you're summoning this off of Urgent Schedule, you summon your 2 things, you go into your Clifford Genius and or Ballista to search the piece you need, and from there you have another way of kind of interacting with your opponent and playing through their board. Here you got 3 Gear Town. This is pretty much one of the key pieces of the deck. It's a field spell. When it pops, it misses timing, right? Well, a lot of the Ancient Gear cards are designed in such a way where that doesn't happen, but you just want to have Fortress up to make sure your opponent can't respond to any of your Ancient Gear cards or effects to avoid that problem. But this is not once per turn, so if you open up multiple copies, it's really good. Not only Tanker, but also Catapult effect. They get rid of them, and then you can actually, and Ballista as well, to then summon the key monster you need, either Golem itself or a way of going into Wyvern or any other extender you need. Which is something you usually want to search in multiples, and I'll show you later on. Ancient Gear Catapult, pretty much one of the best cards in the deck. You have a lot of face-up spells that you can use to just destroy, and then summon your golem from the deck and either the dragon, ignoring summoning conditions. And there's great ways of just these 2 cards alone, chain blocking, preventing your opponent from using Ash, and or other monster negates like Appaloosa. I.e., the example would be Catapult destroys Gear Town. Gear Town summons out Dark Golem. Dark Golem will be Chain Link 1, Gear Town will be Chain Link 2, and they can't respond. Now again, I've been reminded numerous times about my own blunder, so apologies there, but this card would be exponentially better if you could use both effects, but you can't. So that's something that you also can consider in whether or not you already have monsters that you don't want to clear off of the field. For Catapult itself, usually I can search this card, discard it if I'm not using the on-field effect, and I can just use the graveyard effect to destroy Gear Town or anything else that I need to. Floodgates included, and we'll get into that later on. This is the best card in the deck, Ancient Gear Fortress. Really needs no introduction. You have your ability to prevent targeting and destruction, and your opponent can't respond to any of your Ancient Gear cards and effects. So as long as this resolves, the only really time your opponent has an opportunity to activate anything is upon resolution of your cards and effects. Now, with some of your unaffected monsters, this destruction effect doesn't apply. However, the targeting effect will always apply to the opponent, so they can't target your Ancient Gear cards with cards and effects. The added bonus to this card is if they do get rid of it, you're summoning a monster from your hand or graveyard that's an Ancient Gear. You're locked out of summoning monsters besides Ancient Gears, but you're able to, further cause problems for your opponent by forcing them to give you kind of follow up on the following turn. And usually it's another fortress combined with a catapult and something like that. If you're summoning out the Dark Golem from the grave, or if you're summoning out Tanker will then summon Dark Golem. You have 2 bodies on the board that you didn't have before to protect you from getting, ended that turn. So really good ways of protecting yourself, even going first. 2 Ancient Gear Fusion. I've debated on 2 and 3 back and forth multiple times. 2 seems like the accurate number. I actually had kind of a dilemma going into the event, not being able to summon more than 3 fusion monsters in any given duel, because I omitted Ancient Gear Hunting Hound. That was my only other option to kind of have recurring fusion summons, to summon either from the Fortress from the grave, with Gear Town from the grave, or with Tinker from the grave. That's kind of how I did that loop before, but the Hunting Hound does not do nearly as enough as I would hope it to be, or hope it to do. I'm debating on whether or not I'm going to put it in future lists, because more fusion monsters, I feel like they would be more relevant in different formats, but right now it's just summon the Chaos Giant and go for game. 3 Ancient Gear Advance, pretty much the other key piece you need in the deck to open up or start with. You can access this card through Wyvern, through Golem, and through Frame. Though Frame you have to discard a card, it's still another way to get to your Catapult. And if not Catapult, you're getting Fortress. Usually it's either or. And I shrunk the deck down to 50, so there is still, a greater chance of you drawing the cards that you need. Usually the 2 cards in Junction, you have one way of baiting out something of your opponent's, and then one way of preventing your opponent from even doing anything, which is in the form of Fortress. And here's where we kind of come into the non-Ancient Gear cards, which is Urgent Schedule. This is a very offensive card. It's E-Telly for machines. As long as your opponent has a monster, you're restricted from attacking machines, no problem. But it also enables you to, get things out of the deck that you can just use in the graveyard later on. As I was saying, you can combine this with Magical Hound, getting that straight from the deck. As like all the other one-ofs, like Tenguki, the Gizmek monster, and then any of your other Ancient Gears, to then revive with Tanker or something like that later on in the turn, or just getting your commander in the graveyard if you also have the trap card in hand, which isn't necessarily dead all the time. It acts very much like Fortress, where it prevents your opponent from using their monster effects against your Ancient Gear monsters. I mentioned Golem. which, again, really good cards. This is something you definitely like seeing if you're going up against your opponent. Not only is it something that kind of forces your opponent to interact with it after you bring out the monsters, but also it's just a way of extending into lines that you can use for Ballista and for Glyphor Genius. 3 Forbidden Droplet. Again, this is a board breaker deck in some sense or fashion. I found out that I cutting cards like the 1 Lightning Storm and just having Engine alone be powerful enough to just stop your opponent from, or just powerful enough to push through for game. Droplets is really good in conjunction with getting around monsters such as Ubel type monsters, or just that 1 Omni Negate your opponent has for your Ancient Gear Fortress. It's also really good at clearing monsters from your field, so then you can use Catapult and or the Trap card if you're using that. So this is it's pretty much a staple you need. I will slide this out goings game if I know I'm going first. And same thing with the Urgent Schedule, because none of these cards work if your opponent doesn't have any monsters. So then we have 2 Thrust and 2 Talent. Those are pretty straightforward. You don't want talents to draw into another talent and a talents after that. So that's that kind of logic behind it. But also, your opponent will always activate a monster effect. It's pretty much a given. If not trying to stop you from the hand, they're stopping you on the field to some capacity, if not activating something in your draw phase. And that's why Thrust is pretty much the versatile. It gets you to all your one-of spells you have in the deck, and it gets you to any key piece you need, like Terraforming to search, Gear Town, or Catapult. Which, again, it all enables your starters in conjunction with board breakers. Which we do have the 1 Lightning Storm and the 1 Harpy's Feather Duster. There is an Achilles Heal to this deck, and it is solidified back row. So if your opponent has continuous spells and traps in the back row, again, I told you with Ancient Gear Reactor Dragon, this does have issue with dealing with the back row. Now, as long as the back row is not relevant, then you don't really have to worry about getting rid of it. You just have to worry about playing through the monsters. That's good, but in the case of Ubel, Nightmare Pain is definitely a pain, and so you want to be able to get rid of that, if not sooner than later, by usually negating it with Glyphor Genius, or triple thrusting into your pieces to destroy the back row, in conjunction with baiting a negate or something. And then the 1 Terraforming to search that Gear Town, and then the 1 Desires. Sometimes it's that extra card you need to push for game. If not, it's something to get you like 7 cards in hand going game, being turn 2. This is something I usually would side out if I'm going against certain strategies, but overall I feel like Desires is kind of just like that 3rd copy of Talents, or just a way to get two things to the hand. The risk behind that is a lot lower when you've already been through your deck, but I just feel like Desires is just another way to get to pieces that you need to start, because odds are you're not going to banish every golem in your deck, and odds are you're not going to banish every way of fusion summoning, but I might see, knock on wood, I may see, the opposite effect further games down the line, but this has done nothing but good for me. So, there again, they use your own prerogative when it comes down to what kind of ways you're drawing cards, because it's really just a numbers game. You want to be able to get the maximum amount of card advantage, if not be able to just overwhelm your opponent with the amount of cards you have. There's not a great amount of spell or trap negates right now, besides the form of, the rank 10 XE and the Desiree. But later on in the, we'll find out in the format post-ban list, we'll see how relevant spell and trap cards are. The 1 Call by the Grave, self-explanatory enough. And then 1 Ancient Gear Duel. It's like your 4th copy of Fortress. This card, it's sad if you lose it because there's no way of reoccurring that, but it's usually ending the duel if you do have it out. So there's that for my main deck, and I kind of went more into depth there. Hopefully it's not terribly taxing on people. Doing this for the people who actually want to learn and understand kind of my reasoning behind all the cards. Just going into the extra deck, we have 1 Ultimate Ancient Gear Golem, which works really well with that trap that I just showed you. And the thing I found out about a lot of the Ancient Gear fusions is it really isn't necessary to kind of float into other stuff. It does come up from time to time, but it's like I've always seen this card effect at the bottom. I'm like, this is really good. You know, I can summon the Golem or Dark Golem from the graveyard, ignoring its summoning conditions, and I can get advantage back. But if you're aiming your head towards that direction, you're just going to set yourself up for failure. That's, again, it's really niche, but usually you're bringing out this guy just to win with your Ancient Gear Duel. Another neat card is Ancient Gear Howitzer. This guy is a really problematic card for your opponent because it's unaffected by everything and it floats. It also does burn damage, so that's really good in time, but with the one scenario when it actually was terribly relevant, my opponent tried to combo through, tried to out it with their effects. They couldn't. They entered battle and they forgot Fortress was on the field, and therefore Howitzer was able to float into Tanker. Tanker brought back the Howitzer. It's not once per turn. So with 1 Howitzer, you have 4 bodies just through 1 monster. And it's really relevant, especially through Tenpai. If they don't have the Transcendent Dragion, you're able to, you know, defend yourself pretty much indefinitely to get you to that 3rd turn. But the one thing, I was actually facing Asian Persuasion, and he was playing Runic Stun, and he brought out his Moonin to gain 1,000. He passed his turn, and I summoned this thing to burn him 1,000. So it's kind of ironic, but that was a really fun, neat interaction. Double Chaos Giant. You definitely want to see more, or you want to have more than 1 copy of this card, because the second one usually always comes up, if not for your opponent getting rid of a card in your extra deck. I've seen that come from time to time with like a Unicorn, or the Kashtira Unicorn, or something of that nature. But at the same time, it's just so oppressive. You always want, you know, the backup, and this is kind of just the game-ending card. The really thing the opponent can do is use their monster effects, but if you don't have any spells, or sorry, if you don't have an out to Fortress, they're not going to be able to answer this. So there's your big boss monster of the deck. Baguska, as you see, we have a lot of rank 4s, or sorry, we have a lot of level 4s. Usually, let's just say for the Tenpai board, I pretty much just go this. And they just have a hard time outing it. If they Dark Ruler, cool, they get rid of that, but they can't get rid of this. They have to work their way around getting over this guy, and that's kind of only a battle phase thing. Now, if they're like, I've seen maybe somebody used Moonlight Dragon to get rid of this, but at that point, they're extending beyond the point of what's feasible for their extenders. If they do open up multiple extenders, then they're able to get past this, but usually this, combined with a Floodgate, the odds are they're not going to have an out for both your layers of interaction, or both your layers of, I guess, mitigation. So that's kind of my board against Tenpai, which is honestly, it's good enough. If not, I'm that and the Ancient Gear Dragon, and they have very few monsters that can get over 4,500. They would need to go into the Trident Dragon and be able to get, you know, astronomically high to do nothing. Abyss Dweller actually is really good against Yubel. I kind of made mistakes in the past using this incorrectly, but this has a really good place in being able to help you earn follow-up later on, and I'll show you the combos with that in a second. Dugaris never came up for me, but it's always nice to be able to boost your Chaos Giant to 9,000 or something of the like, or just special summon a monster from the grave, or draw 2 cards, just card 1. It will come up. It just didn't come up for me at Nationals. Spriggan's Merrymaker. The level 4s and machines, they all work together really well, so that gains me access to Gigantic Champion Sargus. And the cool thing is this guy's level 8, so you could actually achieve making this guy with 2 of your Ancient Gear Golems, if not the Howitzer. And then you can also make a Dweller. And if you're familiar with Champion Sargus' effect, he's able to destroy or bounce a card when an effect activates. So going through your combo, if you're going 1, you're usually adding, you're definitely adding the Regulus. The Regulus has a negate. You have ways of disabling their graveyard, and you have ways of destroying a card. So with all that combined, that's 3 interactions. That's a lot for them to go through, especially if you're locking down one part of their strategy. The key combo you have here is if you have material here and a material there, you're able to detach the material turn 1 with Abyss Dweller, and then you can chain this to detach another material to target, destroy, or bounce the card. And usually it's the Fortress or it's the Advance you want to add back, so that you can play it again later and then you're searching another card. That's kind of like a neat thing I found out. The same thing goes for if your opponent has, summons a monster, you can chain the Dweller, chain him, bounce the monster, destroy the monster. Really good with all that interaction. Anyways, moving on from that, we're going into the links. We have Nightmare Griffin. Now, I last minute changed this, the Underworld Goddess for this card because it just is a card that makes it so your opponent can't activate their monster effects. Your Ancient Gears don't really need to activate their effects unless you're trying to get somewhere. If you already have the Fusion monster, it just pretty much prevents them from interacting, and then you're able to push for game because it's just all conditions. Now, there was another interaction where I stole somebody's IP Masquerena, and I just went into an Undestructible Griffin. And I was able to reset one of my spells from the graveyard, which is also pretty cool. But again, that's kind of like my only reasoning I had behind it. It only came up once, but that I'm debating on continuing to keep that in. Nightmare Griffin, again, Nightmare Phoenix, self-explanatory there. I wish I had more extra deck space to have more monsters to just go Link 2 into anything, and then tribute it off with Advance or Droplet to then clear my field so I can then do my other plays. But this is kind of all you got. You're not terribly afraid of people recognizing that that's your only, pretty much one of your only ways to get it out of monsters into a different monster, to just shrink your count. But that's kind of how it is. Clifford Genius, it outshined this... it outshined a lot. There's a lot on this card that actually, it really helps push the strategy forward. It requires 2 machine monsters. Doesn't even have to be Earth Machine. So later on, if there's machines that aren't related to the attribute, you can add them in too. But usually you're using your Tanker Summon that has the other monster, or you're using your Urgent Schedule materials to get into this guy. Now, the best thing is when you have him out and you have not used Urgent Schedule yet, your opponent has more monsters, you can summon 2 to the arrows this points to, and then you're adding, your Regulus, you're adding your Golem, you're adding things, you're just getting more advantage off of that. Not only is this immune to cards like SP and Promethean Princess, but this also has the ability to be unaffected by spells and traps, or it is, and then it can disable cards on the field. Again, with Johnny's match, I was able to shut down a lot of his floodgates. Not fast enough, unfortunately, but a lot of his floodgates, just by this guy alone, his runic cards did nothing to it, and I was able to just keep poking for 1800, which I think, you know, one is good enough in the extra deck, but this is a real MVP. The other MVP is obviously your Ancient Gear Ballista. This gets you to all your Ancient Gear cards that are monsters and Gear Town. It's phenomenal at zeroing out the monsters that are too high for you to deal with, and it destroys cards on your field that are spells and traps, so it works good with Gear Town, it works good with Fortress, and it even works good with Floodgates. Sometimes you have Floodgates out that you just want to destroy, so then you can play the game. Same thing with you know, Catapult to destroy your Floodgates on the field to make that token. That's just another part of the game. You're able to destroy, you know, Floodgates during your turn, and stops your opponent or skips their turn, and you're able to go to the races. Moving forward, we have, and this is all going to be subject to change. Mainly there are cards in here like Why Not Play Them, like Rivalry definitely is great against a lot of matchups. There's a reason why it's at 1. Dimensional Barrier to thrust target, Dimensional Ground, thrust target, 3 skill drain. Again, I explained how I can just remove this during my turn. Filter. Yubel is pretty much this deck's hardest matchup, so you want to be able to stop that. And it stops Snake Eye players and all their little things. With the Fiendsmith stuff as well. They can't even go Requiem. So we've already seen this card go up for that reason. I'm glad I purchased these when I did. And it was a good meta call, especially for the NAWCQ. Messenger of Peace, it's my cheese, kind of works really well with Skill Drain, out of all things. It's kind of like a 2-card Mystic Mine versus a 1-card Mystic Mine at the great cost of 100 life points a turn. So, also stops Tenpai. They have to deal with this card. If you have this in Chaos Giant, there's quite literally nothing they can do until they get rid of one of the cards. Same thing with, like, I would conjoin this with Baguska, because sometimes they would go into a higher monster to try to attack over Baguska. This was able to mitigate that. And the cool thing about this is this affects the monsters, so even if you had this out, you can still use Chaos Giant and you can still use Howitzer. Howitzer is not 1500 or less, but Chaos Giant doesn't care about this card, so you're good to have this and attack your opponent's monsters, and then they can't attack you, which is kind of good. 2 DD Crow and 1 Godarla. Really the only thing was I was looking for more options to get rid of or disable things that I did not want to interact or deal with, such as the Desiree, such as like towers like S monsters, that droplets wouldn't do enough for. Like, again, with my deck count, having 1 copy of a card that does one specific thing isn't terribly viable. But then you have stuff like DD Crow, where, like, if I see it, great. And it helps stop against... I was somewhat afraid of Gimmick Puppet block, and this was kind of my only way of outing that. I don't want to run Bestials because that gets disables, or that puts monsters on my board and I can't use Catapult at that point. But I only really used this against 2 different matches. It actually saved me the game for one, and then the other one, it just, prolonged my defeat, but it stopped the 1 Runic Field spell from shuffling stuff in. But there's that for the side deck. And then you got tokens. But I think I'm just going to wrap it up here. I will separate this. I'll have a combo video as well. So for the people that are actually invested in it, I'll show the combo video there. But I really want to just send my thanks out to everybody that was involved in helping me and making me feel, really happy about my victory there. Even though I didn't get top 64, it still really mattered to me that this is something that I was able to achieve. And you guys can too, as long as you put your mind to it. Look at my Guide to Rogue video and kind of my theories behind that. But besides that, Professor signing out. Have a good one.